David had never seen such a place before, as he stepped into the grand chamber of the alien palace. The air was thick with a strange warm mist that carried the scent of something sweet, yet metallic, and the walls around him glowed faintly as if the very stone was alive. The guards who escorted him stood taller than any human, and their black armor shimmered with energy that seemed to hum in rhythm with the floor beneath his boots. They said nothing as they led him deeper into the hall, and the silence pressed down on him, making every step sound louder in his ears than it should. At the end of the chamber was a throne made of a material David could not name. It appeared almost liquid, but held its shape like frozen glass. On it sat the alien queen. Her presence commanded attention, her tall, slender form covered in luminous plates that shifted color with her every breath. Her eyes were unlike any he had ever seen, large and deep, glowing with a faint golden hue that made it impossible to look away. David stopped at the bottom of the throne steps, unsure whether to bow, speak, or simply wait. But the queen broke the silence. Her voice was calm, yet carried a weight that filled the entire chamber. "You are the human envoy," she said, her language strange but translated in his earpiece. "You come from far, and your people claim they wish for peace." David nodded carefully. He could feel the eyes of the guards boring into him with suspicion. "We do," he replied. "Humanity seeks allies. We hope your people might consider working with us." The queen studied him for a long moment, then slowly stood, rising to a height that made David feel small. She stepped down the steps one by one, the soft shimmer of her armor catching the light as if stars had settled on her skin. Then she spoke a sentence that froze him in place. "Before we speak of alliances, you must perform a ritual, a sign of trust among our kind." David blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. "A ritual?" he asked. "What sort of ritual?" The queen stepped closer until he could see the fine ridges of her plated skin and the faint light glowing underneath. She turned slightly away from him, and her long, slender arms gestured toward her back. "You will scrub my back," she said, her voice unwavering. David's heart nearly stopped. He was certain he had misunderstood, but the translation repeated clearly, "You will scrub my back. It is the bond ritual. It is the only way we can know your intent." He opened his mouth to protest, but the queen's head turned sharply, her golden eyes narrowing. "You will not refuse, will you, human?" David glanced at the guards, who had subtly raised their weapons, the humming energy on their armor growing louder. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. He was not trained for anything like this. He was here as a diplomat, a simple envoy, not someone to be dragged into strange, alien customs. Yet he could see no way out. If he refused, this would end not just for him, but for humanity's chance at alliance. So he gave a small nod, and the queen tilted her head slightly in approval. "Come," she said, and she led him into a smaller chamber, lit with soft, bioluminescent light. The room was warm and filled with a low hum, as though the walls themselves were alive. The queen stopped in the center and gestured for him to begin. David looked at the strange basin of shimmering liquid set beside her, and realized it was meant for him to use. He dipped his hands into the cool fluid. It clung to his skin with a faint tingle. Then he approached the queen, unsure how to even start. She knelt slightly, her back facing him, her armor like plates shifting apart just enough to reveal glowing lines beneath. David placed his hands on her back and felt a surge of energy pass through him. The fluid seemed to react, glowing brighter as he moved it across the ridges of her skin. Every line and curve felt alive. The queen's breath slowed, and she made a sound, low in her throat like a distant echo of thunder. David tried to keep his hands steady, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea why this ritual mattered so much, but he could feel the weight of it in every movement. When it was done, the queen slowly turned to face him again, her golden eyes studying him with an intensity that made him shiver. "The ritual is complete," she said softly. "Now you are marked human, and you will be watched always." David did not know what that meant, but before he could ask, the guard stepped forward, taking him by the arms and guiding him back toward the grand chamber. As they moved, one guard leaned close enough for only him to hear, and whispered a single warning. "You are marked now. They will come for youth." Words chilled David to the core. He wanted to ask what they meant, but the guards pushed him forward, leaving no chance to speak as he walked out of the palace. He could not shake the feeling that whatever had just happened was far more than a simple custom, and that his life and perhaps all of humanity had just been bound to something he did not yet understand. David walked back to the guest quarters that had been given to him, and even though the palace halls were quiet, his mind was louder than ever. He could not stop thinking about what had just happened and the strange words of the guard. Every step he took, he felt the weight of invisible eyes watching him, and when he reached the room, the guards outside closed the doors with a heavy thud, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The chamber was comfortable, but it felt like a prison with walls that glowed softly and strange symbols carved across the floor. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his hands together, still feeling the faint tingling from the shimmering liquid he had touched during the ritual. He looked down at his palms and noticed something that made his breath catch in his throat. Faint glowing lines, almost like scars, had begun to form. They were similar to the markings on the queen's back. They pulsed slowly, as if alive. David tried to rub them off, but they stayed, and the more he stared, the stronger the glow became. He felt a sudden sharp pain in his spine and grabbed the edge of the bed to keep from falling. The pain faded after a few seconds, but left a strange warmth in its place. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips, and in that moment, he realized the queen had not been lying. He was marked. David spent the next hours pacing the room. He could not contact his ship. The guards had taken his communicator when they brought him in. He did not know if this ritual was harmless or if it was meant to control him, and the words of the guard kept echoing in his mind. They will come for you. He wondered who they were and what exactly they wanted. As he thought about it, the door opened without warning. Two guards stepped inside, and one of them motioned for him to follow. They said nothing, but David obeyed, and soon they were leading him through another set of glowing corridors. They brought him to a new chamber, much smaller than the throne room. It was filled with large, crystalline structures that emitted soft humming sounds. At the center of the room stood the queen. She turned as he entered, and her golden eyes locked on him. David felt like a child in front of her presence again. She raised a hand, and the guards left, leaving the two of them alone. "You have questions," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge. David nodded. He wanted to demand answers, but he forced himself to remain respectful. "Why did you ask me to do this?" he said. "Why me?" The queen approached him slowly, her luminous armor shifting with every step. "Because you are human," she said softly. "Your kind has something rare, something no other race has." She reached out and touched the markings on his palm, and David felt a strange surge of warmth run up his arm. "This ritual has bonded you to me, and through me to my people," she continued. "You will feel what we feel, you will see what we see, and if you survive, you will be stronger than you were before." "If I survive?" David repeated, his voice sharp. "What does that mean?" The queen did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned to one of the crystal structures and placed her hand on it. Images appeared in the air before them, showing a vast fleet of alien ships moving through space. Their design was nothing like the queen's people. The ships were spiked and angular, and their weapons glowed with a dark crimson light. "These are our enemies," she said. "They seek to destroy us, and now that you are bonded, they will seek you too." David stared at the images. The size of the fleet was overwhelming. How could anyone stand against that? The queen looked back at him, her expression unreadable. "You must understand, human, your people were not our first choice. We have tried this bond with others, but none survived for long. Your body is different. It resists what others cannot. That is why you were chosen." David felt a chill run through him. He did not remember choosing anything. He had only agreed because he had no other choice, and now he was caught in something much larger than himself. The queen stepped closer and lowered her voice. "The mark on your back is more than a symbol, it is a beacon. Others can sense it, and they will come for you," she said, the words of the guard echoing again in David's mind. "But why?" he asked. "Why would they care about me?" The queen's eyes glowed brighter. "Because the bond gives you part of my power, and if they capture you, they will use it against us. She paused, and for the first time David thought he saw a hint of concern on her face. "They will kill you, or worse." David felt his chest tighten. He wanted to run. He wanted to get back to his ship and leave this world behind. But he knew there was no escape. Not now. He was tied to this queen and her people in a way he barely understood. He clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The queen studied him in silence for a moment, then said, "You must stay close to me until the bond stabilizes. If it breaks, we will both die." David could barely process what she was saying. He felt the weight of her words pressing down on him, stronger than before. His thoughts were spinning when a loud alarm suddenly echoed through the chamber. The crystal structures pulsed with red light, and the queen turned sharply, her golden eyes narrowing. "They have found us," she said in a voice filled with quiet fury. David's heart pounded faster as the alarms grew louder, and the queen's guards rushed back into the chamber, their weapons glowing. The queen looked at David, and for the first time he could see urgency in her expression. "Stay with me," she ordered. Before David could respond, the walls shook violently. As a distant explosion rocked the palace, the queen stepped forward, her tall frame standing between him and the danger outside. "The enemy is here," she said, "and now, human, we will see if the bond chooses to keep you alive." The floor of the chamber shook again, and dust fell from the high glowing ceiling as the alarms screamed louder. David could feel the vibration in his chest, as if the very heart of the palace was breaking apart. The guards formed a circle around the queen, their weapons raised, and the faint hum of energy filled the air. The queen glanced back at David, her golden eyes glowing fiercely. "You must come with me," she said in a commanding tone, and without waiting for a reply, she took his arm and led him through a narrow passage behind the crystal structures. The passage was dim, and the walls seemed to pulse like veins of a living creature. David tried to keep up, but the queen moved with incredible speed, despite her tall, slender frame. He could hear the sounds of battle growing louder somewhere above them, the clash of weapons, the roar of engines, and distant explosions. He felt his pulse quicken. As fear crept into his chest, he wanted to ask where they were going, but the queen's grip was firm, and he could sense the urgency in her movements. They entered a large chamber deep beneath the palace. It was filled with strange glowing pods connected by thick cables that snaked across the floor. Queen released his arm and turned to face him, her expression grave. "The enemy has breached the outer defenses," she said. "This place is safe for now, but we do not have much time." David looked around at the glowing pods, and then at the queen. "Why did they attack now?" he asked. The queen stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Because they sense the bond," she said. "They know it makes us stronger, and they fear what we might become." David felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered the guard's warning and the queen's earlier words about being marked. He touched the faint glowing lines on his palm and felt a sudden warmth spread through his body. The queen noticed this and nodded. "The bond is growing," she said. "Soon you will feel it in ways you cannot imagine." David frowned. "I do not understand what is happening to me. Why do I feel stronger? And why do I keep seeing flashes of things that are not real?" The queen tilted her head and studied him. "You are seeing what I see," she explained. "The bond allows us to share thoughts, memories, and senses. You will feel my strength and my fear as I will feel yours." David struggled to take this in. The idea of someone else inside his mind made him uneasy, but at the same time, he could feel a strange connection to the queen, like a thread tying their lives together. The queen stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm and steady. "Listen to me, human. The bond gives you a gift, but it also puts you in great danger if the enemy takes you. They can twist it and destroy us all." Before David could respond, another explosion rocked the chamber, and the glowing pods flickered. The queen's eyes narrowed. "We must move," she said, and she led him to a side door that opened into a long tunnel. The air here was colder, and the walls were lined with strange symbols that shimmered faintly as they passed. David could feel his senses sharpening. He could hear distant voices and footsteps. He could even feel the vibrations of ships landing far above. It was as if the bond was awakening something inside him. As they moved through the tunnel, David suddenly staggered. and grabbed the wall. He saw a flash of a dark spiked ship hovering in the sky, and the image was so real, it made him gasp. The Queen turned quickly and gripped his arm. "What did you see?" she demanded. David described the vision, and the Queen's expression grew tense. "They are closer than I thought," she said, her voice low and urgent. "You must focus. The bond is showing you their moves. Use it to survive." They reached the end of the tunnel and stepped into a hidden hangar filled with sleek alien craft. The Queen gestured to one of the ships. "We must leave this world," she said. "The enemy will destroy everything to find us." David hesitated. He was still trying to process everything that had happened, but he followed her into the craft as the guards took their positions outside to hold off the attackers. The Queen moved with practiced speed, activating the controls as the ship hummed to life. Hangar doors opened with a low rumble, and David saw the night sky above, filled with fire and smoke. Enemy ships circled like predators, striking the palace and surrounding city. The Queen guided the ship upward, weaving through the chaos with incredible skill. David could feel his heart pounding, and the bond made him sense the Queen's focus and determination as if it was his own. As they cleared the atmosphere, David saw the enemy fleet waiting for them. The dark spiked ships formed a massive blockade, their weapons glowing with crimson light. The Queen's voice was calm but firm. "We cannot fight them head on," she said. "The bond is not strong enough yet, but there is a way to survive." David looked at her, how she turned her eyes to him, and for the first time he saw uncertainty in her gaze. "Because you are human," she said softly, "you can endure what others cannot." David felt a surge of dread in his stomach. "What are you asking me to do?" The Queen placed a hand on the glowing lines on his chest, and he felt the warmth of the bond spreading through his body. "If you allow the bond to grow deeper," she said, "we can escape together, but the process is dangerous, and it could kill you." David stared at her. He could feel her heartbeat echoing in his own as if their lives were already intertwined. He did not know what to say, but before he could decide, a blast from the enemy fleet struck the side of the ship, sending it spinning through space. Queen gripped the controls and forced the ship to stabilize. Her voice was sharper. "Now you must choose," she said. "If we do not deepen the bond, we will not survive." David's mind raced. He thought of his people and the hope of an alliance, and he thought of the Queen, whose life was tied to his own. He knew that whatever choice he made would change everything. The enemy ships closed in like wolves, and David felt the mark on his back burn brighter than ever. Ship shook violently as another blast struck the rear thrusters, and David felt the heat from the sparks that burst across the console. He gripped the edge of the seat, struggling to keep his balance while the Queen's long fingers moved quickly over the controls, trying to keep the vessel steady. Enemy ships closed in from every direction, their crimson weapons glowing like hungry eyes in the blackness of space. David could feel the bond surging in his chest, stronger than ever, and with it came waves of the Queen's emotions, her determination, her fear, and the unbearable pressure of survival. The Queen turned her golden gaze on him, and her voice was calm but heavy with meaning. "If you do not deepen the bond now, we will die," she said. "I can hold the ship only for a short time longer." David's heart pounded faster. He did not know if he could survive what she was asking, but he could see no other way. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Do it," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. The Queen moved closer, her presence towering and commanding, and she placed both hands against the glowing marks on his chest. The moment her hands touched him, David felt a flood of energy rush through his entire body. His vision blurred and his breath caught in his throat. The bond was no longer a thread but a storm connecting their minds and souls. He saw fragments of the Queen's life, images of her people building great cities under glowing skies, the endless war against the enemy fleet, and the crushing burden of leadership that weighed on her shoulders. He felt her pain and her hope, and he realized she was as desperate to save her people as humanity would be to save their own. David screamed as the energy tore through him. It felt as if every cell in his body was on fire, but at the same time, a new strength filled him. The bond was rewriting him, changing him into something more than human. When his Vision cleared. He could see the enemy ships not only through the ship's sensors, but through a sense deep in his mind. He could feel their positions, their movements, even their intentions. Queen's voice reached him through the connection. Calm and steady, we are one now. Human, use what you see. David moved to the weapons console, and the system came alive beneath his touch as though it recognized him. He locked onto the nearest enemy ship and fired twin bursts of energy. The blasts hit, perfectly tearing the vessel apart. The bond sharpened his reflexes, guiding his hands with precision he had never known before. The Queen piloted the ship, weaving between enemy fire while David unleashed strike after strike, each one devastating. Their attackers, the enemy fleet, began to falter, but there were too many of them. One of the enemy's largest ships moved forward, its crimson glow intensifying as it prepared to fire a weapon that could obliterate them in a single shot. David felt its deadly power through the bond, and the Queen sensed it too. Her golden eyes narrowed. This is the weapon that will end us, she said. We must destroy it, but our weapons are not strong enough. David looked at her, then at the ship, and an idea formed in his mind. The bond gave him access to her energy and her life force. He could channel it through the ship's core and turn the entire vessel into a living weapon. But the Queen's voice cut through his thoughts. If you do this, the energy will consume you, she said. You will not survive. David stared at her, and he could feel her fear for him through the bond. It was strange. He had expected her to see him only as a tool, but he could sense genuine concern in her heart. He shook his head slowly. If we do nothing, everyone dies, he said. You know this. The Queen hesitated, her hands tightening on the controls. David reached out and placed a hand over hers. Through the bond he let her feel his resolve. The Queen closed her eyes for a moment, then gave a single nod. I will guide you, she said. David moved to the central console and placed his hands on the glowing core of the ship. He could feel the energy rushing through him, even more violently than before. It burned like a star in his veins, but he held on. The Queen poured her own strength into the connection, and together they focused the energy into the ship's forward cannon. David screamed as the power built to a blinding peak, and then he released it in a single devastating blast. Beam tore through the void like a spear of light, striking the enemy superweapon and ripping it apart in a violent explosion. The shockwave sent smaller enemy ships spinning away like leaves in a storm. David collapsed to his knees, his entire body trembling from the effort. He felt the Queen's hands catch him before he fell completely. Her voice was distant, but filled with relief. The weapon is gone, she said. But David could barely hear her. The world was fading, and the bond felt weaker, as if it too was slipping away. The Queen moved quickly, carrying him back to the pilot's seat as the remaining enemy ships scattered. Their formation broken, their morale shattered. The Queen's fleet, which had been holding back, now surged forward, overwhelming the fleeing attackers. David could feel her joy and triumph, but it was mixed with sorrow because she knew he was dying. His body was too fragile to handle the bond at this level. She held him close as she piloted the ship toward the safety of her flagship, her voice soft. Now, human, you have done more than I could have asked of any being. David struggled to keep his eyes open. He wanted to speak, but his voice failed him. He could only look at her, and through the bond she understood. He had no regrets. The Queen carried him from the ship once they landed, and the guards stepped aside, their faces solemn. She brought him to a quiet chamber where the glow was softer and the air warm. She placed him gently on a bed and knelt beside him, her golden eyes never leaving his face. You will not leave me, she whispered. For the first time, David saw a tear fall from her eye, a single droplet of golden light that landed on his chest. She closed her eyes and pressed her hands over his heart. Calling upon the bond one last time, she poured her life force into him, ignoring the pain it caused her. His chest rose sharply as the energy rushed back into him, and the glow of the markings on his body grew stronger. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw the Queen swaying unsteadily, her glow dimmer than before. David tried to sit up, but she stopped him, her voice quiet. I have given you enough to survive, but the cost is mine to bear. David shook his head. He wanted to argue, but she only Smiled faintly. "You must live," she said, "for your people, and for mine." David opened his eyes slowly. The chamber was quiet, and the soft golden light from the walls was the first thing he saw. His chest felt heavy, but he was alive. He tried to sit up, and his body ached as though he had carried the weight of a world on his shoulders. When he looked down at himself, the glowing markings were still there, but they were faint and steady, no longer burning through him like fire. He remembered the battle, the bond, the blast that had destroyed the enemy weapon, and the last thing he saw before darkness had claimed him was the Queen's face filled with sorrow. He turned his head and found her sitting nearby, her tall frame bent slightly forward, her hands resting on her knees. She looked weaker than before, the glow of her armor-like skin dimmer, but when she saw David's eyes open, she rose and stepped closer, a small flicker of relief passing across her golden gaze. "You survived," she said softly, her voice carrying both strength and weariness. David tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He managed only a whisper. "You saved me." The Queen shook her head slowly. "No, human, you saved us all. The bond was stronger than I believed it could be. Your choice turned the tide of battle, and without you, my people would have been lost." David could feel the truth in her words, through the bond which, though weaker, was still present, a quiet thread connecting them. He sat up fully now, though the effort left him breathless. He looked at her and saw how unsteady she was. He realized she had given part of herself to keep him alive. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why risk your life for me?" The Queen's expression softened. "Because I saw what makes your kind different," she said. "I saw it when you chose to face death so that others could live. Your people are young compared to mine, yet you hold a strength we have long forgotten, and that strength has saved not only my people, but perhaps yours as well." David lowered his head for a moment, her words stirring something deep inside him. The war was not over, but the enemy fleet had been broken, and for the first time the Queen's people had hope. He stood carefully, and the Queen reached out, hand steadying him. He looked at her and nodded. "We need to make sure this was not for nothing," he said. "Humanity and your people must stand together now." The Queen regarded him for a long moment, her golden eyes shimmering faintly. Then she extended her hand in the gesture he had come to recognize as one of respect and unity. David took it and felt the bond respond quietly. The connection would never be as strong as it had been in the battle, but it was still there, a sign that their lives were now bound in trust. Word of the victory spread quickly through the Queen's fleet, and beyond the enemy forces retreated into the depths of space, broken and leaderless, and the news of their defeat carried hope to other worlds that had suffered under their shadow. The Queen's advisors spoke of rebuilding their cities and preparing for whatever future challenges might come, but David's thoughts were on Earth. He knew humanity would be watching closely, wondering if the mission he had begun had succeeded. Days later, he stood with the Queen on the vast balcony of her palace, rebuilt from the ruins of the attack. The skies above glowed with soft alien light, and the distant hum of engines from repair ships filled the air. The Queen turned to him and spoke with the quiet dignity that always surrounded her. "When you first stood before me, human, I thought you were fragile and uncertain, but now I see that your strength lies in your heart." David smiled faintly, though the weight of all that had happened still lingered. He could feel the bond between them. It was no longer overwhelming, but it was enough to remind him he was not alone. When he returned to his ship to prepare for the journey back to Earth, the Queen accompanied him to the docking bay, her tall frame casting a long shadow across the smooth, glowing floor. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and for a moment, he felt the warmth of the bond more clearly than ever. "The alliance between our peoples will endure," she said, "because you showed me that humanity is worth trusting." David met her gaze and nodded. "I will tell my people the same." As the ship lifted from the docking bay, David watched the Queen's figure grow smaller until the stars swallowed the view. He leaned back in the pilot's seat and let out a long breath. He had come to this world as a simple envoy, and he was leaving as something far more. His body bore the glowing marks of the bond, and his heart carried the memory of everything he had seen and felt. He knew there would be questions when he returned home, but he also knew the answers would shape the future of both civilizations. The bond pulsed faintly in his chest, as if the Queen's presence was still with him somewhere in the distance. David closed his eyes for a moment and felt a sense of quiet pride. He had seen the strength and hope that humanity could offer, and he had shared it with the people who had once been strangers and now were allies as the ship moved into the vastness of space. David opened his eyes and looked at the stars ahead, knowing that this journey was only the beginning. But whatever challenges lay waiting, he would face them with the same courage that had carried him through the battle, because he was human, and now the galaxy would know what that meant. The mark on his chest glowed softly in the darkness, a reminder of the bond, the sacrifice, and the unbroken promise that two very different worlds would walk forward together. The end.